Welcome to the Matchbook Betting Strategy Podcast. I'm Jesse May, and very lucky, a little unique, a little unusual, a little special, the podcast today. And we're lucky to have two gentlemen with us who, I'll say something very rare about both of them, which is that I would follow both of their bets in the blind. If they're betting something, I'm not even, I'm happy to have something on. No matter what it is. So we're lucky to have them here. First from Betting Emporium, it's Neil Channing. Welcome, Neil.
I'm assuming I can put you down for 10% of today's action.
Actually,
it hasn't been going great.
Yes, as long as I also get tomorrow. Yes.
Well, we might win it back tomorrow. You never know.
And also, Matchbook Insights contributor, and from EGR, it's Brad Allen.
How you doing, Jesse? Good to talk to you.
Another thing I'd say about both you guys, it's a little similar, is that neither of you are specialists in that your strategy, whatever it is, applies to many sports, which is a little
equally useless in everything.
That's how you feel today. But speaking of, this is the Betting Strategy Podcast, so let's start there, Brad. How would you describe your strategy?
I would say it all starts with the model. A model. I mean, I look at a few because I've found that models can basically say whatever you want them to. So I look at a few to kind of get a raw number. So that's your starting point, and then I like to add in the subjective stuff. So, if it's NFL, how these cornerbacks might match up with the wide receivers. If it's baseball, if you've got a fly ball pitcher and the wind's blowing out, you might want to bet against him. So I feel like you really need somewhere to start, that number to start with, and then you can add stuff on after that. That's probably my approach.
Neil, what about your strategy? How would you define it?
Well, I've been around a long time, so it changes quite a lot. But generally speaking, these days, I kind of have a sort of fundamental. I kind of accept that the market is somewhat correct in all matters. It's never miles out, and then I look for reasons why it might be slightly skewed one way or the other, and that kind of goes with all sports. And whether that reason is quite commonly recency bias, which is luckily a concept that applies in all sports. That might be one of the reasons, or, sometimes in horse racing, it's just that certain factors are overrated by the market and other factors are underrated by the market. And my assessment of how much credence I give to certain variables may be different to the way the market is.
So it sounds like your strategy is very similar to Brad's, except that instead of the model, you just use the market as the model. Is that fair?
A little bit, although obviously, I sometimes hear people say that you can just see what the market's doing and follow the market. I mean that wouldn't be. I don't really understand that, because does that mean you just end up being the favourite and everything? I sort of. Like in the old days where I used to be a racecourse bookmaker, I would sit down and do what people used to call a tissue. So I would sit down and write down what I thought the correct prices on each horse were, and then add up the percentages and go to a very low or to 100%, and then I would lay the ones that I got to lay under those prices and not bother laying the other ones. I'm not saying that was a brilliant way of working, but it was a way of working. And to an extent, you kind of don't really need to do that anymore, because the market, is a lot more perfect because of exchanges. But then, having said that, it's only a snapshot of where we are at the moment. We can look at the horses on Matchbook for the next race. We're recording this on Monday night, and it's Windsor going on. But, they'll probably change massively between now and the time of the race. So for people to say, oh, the market's always correct, that's not really true. But I sort of tend to think that it's never a million miles out, and I tend to sort of start off by just thinking, well, what are the reasons it might be wrong for certain selections or in a in a 2-runner race.
Okay, well, look, I think this sounds kind of similar. You guys, look for a model and then you look to apply external factors. So let's do something which I think sounds fun. What you guys did this past Saturday, what you went through, let's start with what time you woke up on Saturday, Brad, and what's the first thing you did in relation to your betting day?
I'd like to bet Brad woke up later than me.
Well, yeah.
Never.
I did actually message Neil about 7:30, I think, on Saturday, because we'd had a winning baseball day and I wanted to boast about it. But I was up about 7. I think that's just when I wake up for work normally, so I woke up around that time. So I sent a quick bragging text to Neil, and then I started looking at horses just because it's Saturday. I don't normally bet horses in the week, but I follow a few people. I suppose people are more interested in what I do for baseball because that's where I do my.
You were looking at horses, I guess, because it was Goodwood, and you thought there was some value out there. Maybe not with your judgment, but with some other people's.
Yeah, exactly. I know enough to know that I can't beat the market on horse racing. I'm definitely getting more into it nowadays. But I wouldn't back my own judgment yet, and I follow other people. So I stuck a few racing bets on, got a few opinions. But for baseball, it always starts.
When you back other people's opinions. Sorry.
No worries. No.
Brad. When you back other people's opinions, do you stake less than when you back your own opinions?
I suppose it depends how much of a track record I have with them and how much they have and how much I trust them, I guess. So if they've got a documented history of profitability, of beating the market, beating the closing number, then I will bet more. Obviously horses is a hell of a lot more volatile than baseball. Baseball is generally around evens, so probably half stakes for horses compared to baseball, and then a third or a quarter of NFL stakes for me.
You've had a couple bets. You haven't gotten dressed yet, and you haven't done any of your baseball work. Neil, where have you gotten to at 8:00 in the morning?
Well, generally on a Saturday, that's about my start time. It was 7 to 8. But because it was Goodwood, I had to do some stuff for Betting Emporium. I did wake up quite a bit earlier. I woke up about 3:30.
Hello. Yeah, I know you like to do every race fresh.
And I don't really like to do those races the day before, because I think if the going changes or there are non-runners and you do it the day before and then you revisit it, it's quite hard to get the original ideas and conclusions that you came to out of your mind and to start again. And I do think you should visit it fresh. The other thing is that, I'm thinking about the market. There's also things that are influential in the market that aren't available the day before. And one of those is market sentiment. Which way are people thinking collectively? And you can't really judge that the day before. So I look at quite a lot of sort of people that influence the market. For example, on the At the Races site, Hugh Taylor, if he gives a tip in some race, that's going to have a huge influence on the market. He's a very successful tipster, and his selection will probably shorten, and that might mean that other horses in the race drift. So I like to, even if I'm not necessarily going to follow him, I like to know if he's doing something, because I don't want to sit and think, I wonder why that horse went from 6s into 4s. If I can just say, it did that because Hugh Taylor tipped it. So there's a few things that I think are key indicators and move the market in the way that he does. So I tend to always have a read of all of those things if I can find them. Usually, I don't know, I like to read all the trainer comments and stuff. I tend to think that that's quite a weird one, isn't it? Like, that's all kind of freely available in the public domain. But if you start looking at 3:00 in the morning, a horse might be 8 to 1, and then nothing's really changed, but just as more people wake up and read the paper and back it, it might go into 6-1, and they're just looking at the same information, but they're just more like Brad. They just wake up at normal person's time. So,
okay, so
that's weird that should happen in a world of 24-hour markets, and in a world where you can get the Racing Post online at 8 p.m. the day before, and all the firms, all the fixed odds bookmakers price up the race at 4:30 in the afternoon the day before.
It's like Vegas, Neil. Even though everybody knows the best games are, on Saturday morning at 3 a.m., people still want to go out on Friday night.
That's true. It's true. And so, that's quite a sort of a weird thing. And then, I did my write-ups for Betting Emporium. I'd probably done 4 out of the 7 by 9 o'clock. And
all right. I want to get back to these write-ups, but let's get back to you're up to about 9 a.m. perhaps. Brad, now you're moving into your main appetite for the day, I guess, baseball. It's all about getting the early lines. How do you approach it in the beginning? Do you have it fresh, or do you have games in your mind that you want to bet on?
No, I've normally not looked at any of the games on the lines. So I normally pull up Matchbook, just have a scroll down, have a look through all the games, and see if anything jumps out immediately.
There'll be a bonus in your account.
This is genuinely honest. I'm not just shilling here.
I will say I think Matchbook actually is one of the first up with the lines. Even perhaps but before Pinnacle. Baseball is an interesting one.
Yeah. Have a scroll through Matchbook. See if anything jumps out. It's a bit tricky with baseball. It's not like the NFL where you've got more of a kind of idea in mind of what the number should be. Then I pull up a couple of models, have a scroll down of them, and if two agree, generally I might just fire a bet off. Then it kind of depends on the pitcher. I mean, if it's someone with an established track record and you kind of know what to expect, I'm happy sending out a bet just on models agreement. But I mean, if it's a newer pitcher, if it's a rookie, if it's someone coming back off an injury, I want to check things like their velocity, last few games, things like swinging strike rate.
Did anything jump out at you on Saturday?
Saturday, I'm afraid I literally have no idea, Jesse. I've bet 25 baseball games since then. After 4 months of this, I literally cannot remember. I'm sorry.
So you have fired off most of your bets early then?
Well, no. So I don't know. I've done 3 or 4 off the models. Then I've opened up a couple of sort of DFS spreadsheets where they've got the last 30 days with things like swinging strike rate and walk rate and all this kind of thing. And they've got it nicely color coded when I use. So it's, have a look through the pictures, who's hot, who's cold. And then you've got to kind of work out, again, this is a bit of subjective judgment on top of the models where, is this pitcher hot? Is it just because he's just played 4 games against trash teams? Is he trying out a new pitch? So you might have to delve a bit deeper into individual pitchers. Then I'll pull up the umpires and the weather. Then do the totals off that. So I mean, then I've got about, I don't know, 6 or 7 bets generally. Well, I always stick offers up on the exchange, just because you're paying half the exchange rate, and you generally get a better price as well. So I'm always happy to miss a few if I get matched on the majority, just for the better prices.
All right, Neil.
You messaged me and you showed me a picture of something I'd never seen before with your models, and said, "I'm just settling down to this." At 1:30 p.m. on Saturday, and then at 4 p.m. you had 2 bets on the totals. Yeah, and then you had 3 more a bit later at like 8:30.
Well, I mean,
was it the Rosetta Stone?
It depends. When they get matched, because when I send them to Neil, he smashes them in and the price goes. So I don't want to be giving them away before then. And it just depends on the day, doesn't it? Some days I will have 10, some days the market is, broadly in line with what I think, and I might just have a couple. It does vary very much day by day as well.
All right, Neil, what did you start to focus in on Saturday? I mean, it was an interesting day for you, wasn't it? Because you're having a very good week. So, I mean, being in the zone is quite nice.
Yeah, it was good. I was, because I try and send the write-ups to Betting Emporium at 30-minute intervals from 9 o'clock until noon. And I want the customers to know they can read it at a set time. I think with tipping sites, it's kind of bad if you have to be on 24-hour standby for something to come through, and then you decide to go down the pub just at the time that they have the biggest bet of the year and you miss it. So we always tend to sort of tell people this is when it's going to happen, so that they can plan their lives, because most of our customers are just kind of normal people that are not professional gamblers. So I do try and keep to the deadlines, but in between, I'm also trying to update my spreadsheet with my own bets so that I've got some kind of record of what I've been doing, and get my own bets on. So I have a bunch of people that I tend to text and ask them to try and help me out with maybe some of the each way bets. And then the win only bets I just tend to do on the exchanges. So I was kind of, and I don't tend to, that's the other thing. I've really changed the way I bet over the years, and primarily I spend most of my biggest bets are done on races where the bookmakers ought to be, reasonably happy to see your business. So I didn't actually have that much trouble getting my bets on this week. It was kind of, some of those big handicaps I was betting 4 or 5 in a race. And if you're trying to bet each way with fixed odds bookmakers, and some are doing 5 places a quarter, and some are doing 5 places a fifth, and some are doing 7 places a fifth, and others are doing 4 a quarter, it's just jostling around and making sure you kind of get the right terms. I did back a couple of horses that finished 5th where I got on first 4. That was pretty annoying. So I was doing a fair amount of that sort of mid-morning, just, getting text back from people. Yeah, I got you this, I got you that. Oh, we got knocked back, we didn't manage that. I normally have a few people that just want to send me kind of moany texts all the time. That's never a good thing.
So then, most Goodwood bets done, let's say, which is your...
No, actually, I didn't really... On Saturday, I didn't really get many done early at all. I didn't really start doing any until noon, which actually, that suits me, because I've tried to find a way of betting that if you were my bookmaker, you would just think, if I do happen to win over a period of time, well, he's a bit of a lucky boy.
And really. This is all obviously based on...
I want longevity. I'm not planning to die anytime soon, and no one's going to give me a job. So I want to be able to carry on. All these people that moan about all my accounts are closed and I can't get on anywhere, they either need to rethink the way they bet or go and get a job. And I'm not going to go and get a job because I don't really fancy that. So I just had to rethink the way I bet, which means that I tend to bet in things with quite high volatility and have quite extended losing runs. And that way, if you're my bookmaker, you might think, well, blimey, he's a bit of an idiot. He just bet 17 consecutive losers. But, there's some method in that madness. It's quite hard psychologically, but I think the poker background helps, because, if you enter a poker tournament, you're not really supposed to win. If there's 4,000 people in it, you're probably not going to win. So you can enter dozens on the spin without anything good happening. So just backing a few 8-1 losers and some handicaps is easy for me. I don't get upset about that at all.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you're backing the kind of bets that the bookmakers don't like, you won't be betting there anymore, because they're going to be quick to cut you. Now, Brad, your betting, let's say your betting is done, your baseball, your first bets. What do you spend the rest of Saturday doing? Do you keep looking at data and perhaps top up?
He just counts his money. He's got a room full of gold, and he just goes in there and bathes in it.
How often will you make a top up? You've got like 12 hours to kill before these games kick off.
Yeah, well, I do. As I say, I use a lot of daily fantasy analysis. So as the kind of Americans wake up, I don't know, and start publishing DFS analysis on various pitchers and this kind of thing, I have another look at 4, have another look at 8, I don't know, and obviously the lines are always moving. They might move, they might push a team into a range I'd consider value. So I mean, I'm still checking lines and checking analysis and adding bets all day where possible. But it's not just I'm not just done by 11. It's an all day thing, where possible.
What do you do if you like a bet, let's say, and you've made a bet, and then the market moves your way in a sense, which means you get a better price? Do you bet again, and will you do that all day?
Yeah.
When will you raise the white flag and say, okay, maybe I've got it wrong or something, or I've had enough on?
It's a good question. I do generally believe in sort of, the efficient market hypothesis, but there is also lines move the wrong way. They move one way then the other. You hear about syndicates dummying things up and then coming back the other way. So if I'm certainly on NFL and baseball, I'm sort of confident enough that, and I bet to a size where if it goes the wrong way, if it goes against me, the line, and I can get the same bet at a better number, I'm happy enough to have another unit on that again. I don't suddenly go off it because the market doesn't like it at that stage. So yeah, I'm happy to rebet maybe 2 or 3 times. I've done that a few times. I don't know if I've never checked if that's long-term profitable, but I assume it can't be too detrimental as the overall bottom line's fine.
What about you, Neil? Have you ever just cried uncle and said, I'm not having any more?
Yeah, I mean, with horse racing, I think you can always assume that somebody probably knows more than you. It's going to be something to do with the well-being of the horse or inside information from the connections. I definitely had a couple of bets on Saturday where I felt like, not so much the Goodwood ones, just, I did bet on a lot of races on Saturday. I definitely had a few bets where I just kind of, I bet something 11-2 and then it went 8-1. And I just kind of thought, I feel like I'm slaughtering money, but I'm just going to have a little top up on it. And I was slaughtering money as it worked out. But, yeah, I'm a bit cautious of that. But then actually, I feel more strongly the other way, though. If I want to back a horse at 11-2 and I get 11-2 early, but I don't get fully matched, and now it's gone 5-1, and I'm kind of trying to get matched and still chasing the price, and now suddenly it goes 9-2, 4-1. I quit now, and I just say, look, that's it. I just missed it. I'm just going to have a third of a unit on this one instead of what I wanted. And I think in the long run, that's definitely a good thing to do.
If you look back at how your day went on Saturday and how that you might have had that Saturday, say a year or 2 or 5 years or even more ago, what advice would you give yourself as far as?
I've got one that I think is quite important because I do have a lot of bets on a lot of horse races. I find it quite. I mean, I've had 3 while we've been talking here.
You've had 3. And you didn't give me 10%.
I'm doing okay. I do find it hard to let a race go by without having anything because if I do look at all races for future knowledge and stuff, and it's impossible to look at a race without coming to some opinion because of exchanges. Really, you can always lay something or lay it to place or back. If you don't have a strong view on the win, maybe you can find something in the place market or whatever. So I generally just, because I'm watching the race, think, well, I'll find something to do in this race. But I think the advice for my younger self, which is possibly the reason that I got it so wrong for a long time when I was quite a young fella, is possibly because of my bankroll. When you get a slightly bigger bankroll, you give yourself, your point state can the range can be a lot higher. You can have 100 points on a proper fancy and 1 point on a throwaway. And I think when I was younger, like a big bet for me might be 50 quid when I was in my teens or whatever, and a small bet, might be 2 quid. Actually, it wasn't even 50 quid; it was probably more like 15 quid. And the difference between a big bet and a small bet was too close. So the interest bets would eat me up. And, the ones where I really had an edge needed to be bigger. But I couldn't really bet bigger on those ones because my overall bankroll was too small. I'm quite good at that now. I quite often have like 20 quid on something in a race just to give me something to watch. I certainly don't feel the need to have 300 or 400 quid on something just for an interest in a race. But then if I'm having a proper bet, then I do. I'm not afraid to unload. So I think the range and size of bets I have is enormous now, and I actually think that's quite a good thing.
What about you, Brad? What advice would you give your younger self? And also, are you betting on Egyptian handball while we've been having this conversation?
I am not, I'm afraid.
I'm relieved to hear that. If I'd have heard you were and you weren't sharing with Jesse and I'd have been quite cross.
So I'll give you my top Egyptian handball tips in a bit. No, so I would agree with Neil there. It's boring, but money management and sort of staking correctly. I was reading a book recently called "What I Learned Losing $1 Million" about this trader, and he's describing this bit. He's locked into some short selling thing, and he's losing $1,000 a day, and he's losing weight. He can't talk to his wife, and it brought up those feelings.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, it's a good book.
2 symptoms of it that sound brilliant.
yeah. Maybe you should lose some money, Neil. He's talking, that kind of feeling where you're in a bit too deep in a trade or a bet, and you get that horrible sick feeling in your stomach. And it reminded me basically that I haven't had that in a long time. I stake more sensibly. People talk about 2% of your bankroll per bet, that kind of thing, which is dull, but it keeps you in the game, and it sustains you in those losing periods. I mean, Neil will tell you the last 2 months or whatever, 1 month or 6 weeks, I had a definite bad run of baseball bets. I probably lost 40% of my bankroll, but that would have wiped a lot of people out, but it didn't. I still had 60% and managed to get it back up to where it was 2 months ago. But just staying in the game.
That's great. It's funny. People say that like winning is the greatest feeling in gambling. I think actually the greatest feeling in gambling is getting going off a smaller bankroll and getting back to where you were. That's like one of the greatest feelings you can have. Dialing down, getting going.
You did have that game where you had half the money left on the angle.
Indeed. So yeah, I mean, there was a study I was reading about where they basically gave a load of people coins, and they said if it lands heads, you'll get 5 to 4 on your bet, and see how much money you can make. And something like 25% of them went bankrupt just because even with that massive edge, just because they staked incorrectly. So kind of just protect your future earnings. And then also along that vein is trying to minimize your losses again. It's something I do a lot more recently, is trying to pay less juice. So if it's a favorite, laying extra points, laying extra runs. If it's a total, taking it down. If I'm betting the under and it's 8.5, I might play under 8 just to get odds against. It's just losing less when the bet goes wrong. It seems to help. And then I suppose the final thing, I read a lot about these cognitive biases and all this kind of thing, which affects people when trading or whatever. And there's some very useful ones. I would encourage people to read things like Predictably Irrational. All these little flaws in the human mentality which affect your betting. Just recency bias. If the team's won 5 games in a row, people see that in the form. Whether it's a football team or a horse or whatever, and they go, "Oh, they're going to win again," but that's not really how that works. So kind of just taking bigger sample sizes into account as well is one thing I do a lot more now, I would say.
Brad, tell us about your biggest loss and what it taught you. Mine, by the way, was on a horse named Carborundum.
Yeah, go on. What happened to Carborundum?
Well, it was my biggest loss because it was the last time I bet absolutely everything. And I was convinced, obviously, that the horse couldn't lose. And it was out at Arlington Park. And I was so confident in this horse. Here's how confident I was. I didn't buy a return ticket on the train because I wanted extra money to bet on the horse.
Yeah. Why were you so sure?
And,
Why were you so sure it was going to win? What was the rationale?
It was just the race. Listen, I was 18 years old. Maybe I was
Unlucky Dan.
19. Yeah, you could be. I
actually watched this thing last night for some
16
reason.
days in a row at the racetrack at Arlington.
Really?
I've been thinking about American racing all day because I watched the Sting again last night for some reason.
Anyway,
Unlucky Dan.
Just quickly. Obviously, the horse came fifth. The pace was a little too slow. He was a come from behind horse, and I ended up throwing up in the men's room.
That's not good.
I have no idea how I got home.
I think your staking plan's gone slightly awry when puking is involved.
Yes. So anyway,
Kelly talks a lot about puking.
There's no sure thing. Number one, it taught me that there's such a thing as a sure thing, and obviously that you really shouldn't be betting everything.
Yes, I mean, one of my worst losses was on the bloody crypto markets. I had a mate who gave me a hot tip. Oh yeah, buy some Ripple. It's going to be crypto of the future, and that promptly lost about 80% of its value. And I saw him about 2 months later, and he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I sold mine ages ago." So I nearly lamped him. But in the sports betting, I mean, relatively recently, I lost about 1,200 quid on Spain against Portugal in the World Cup. That Ronaldo goal was a killer, and it was more than I meant to stake. I started, I think, 200 or 300, which was a chunky bet on football for me. But it seemed based on very solid information from the likes of Brothers and Mark O'Hare, and I think 538's ELO model and some expected goals. Everything kind of lined up that Spain were a good bet. I think I backed them about just better than evens, and then they fired their manager. Of course, it drifted out to 2.1 odds or 2.15. So I added some more. Then I got an offer from Matchbook saying, "Well, we'll top up 20% of your winnings on this Spain game up to 100 quid. So obviously to maximise your expected value there, you got to win 500, so they give you the full 100 bonus. So I stuck another offer up on Spain. I did it via mobile on some Spotty 4G, so I ended up getting matched double. So I've got 1,200 quid on Spain when I started out with 200, and so obviously I had time. I had a couple of hours. I'm still on mobile, but so I had to weigh up. Is this a good bet? Do I want to lay back 700 quid on or whatever on a bet which I'm almost sure is bad on the Portugal side, or can I stand to lose 1,200 quid on this football match? And I came to the conclusion that no, I didn't want to put in a big bet on what I knew was a horrible price on Portugal. So I let it ride, and Ronaldo made sure it was a painful watch in the end. But what did I learn? I suppose just I don't know really. I don't really regret it. It was just a bad bet, I guess, or a bad result at least.
You learned that you can stand the pain.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Neil mentioned this earlier, like the psychology, and that is without doubt the hardest thing of doing this properly. I mean, I do have a full-time job, and I respect people like Neil, or people who don't have that safety net, because I'm sure everyone's had those month or two you can't win a bet, and you feel like you can't find a winner, and it is a horrible feeling. So I mean, if to keep doing it as long as Neil has, I think he's got some mental fortitude, if nothing else.
Neil, your biggest loss? Can you still remember it? And it wasn't the spoof at the restaurant, was it? That store.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Yeah, there was one game of spoof where I remember betting more than I had on me. There was like it was like dinner for 14, and somebody suggested we spoof for the bill, and I was too embarrassed to say I didn't have enough to pay. So I got involved in the spoof. That was
one of my favorite stories, but maybe it's for a later podcast.
Maybe for a later podcast. I don't know. I mean, actually, in terms of, it's all relative, isn't it? I've been doing this a long time, and there were times in my early career where losing £50 would be, catastrophe. And in my latter times, quite big amounts change hands without really thinking about it that much.
Oh, really? Yeah, I mean, that's what I meant. When I said the horse carborundum, it was really just a question of proportion.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember maybe, I don't know when the tech stock crash was, and the Nasdaq broke through 5,000, and then it just went to nothing, or not much. And I got involved in a couple of shares. Again, like Brad said with the crypto, doing something that I didn't really know anything about, following a tip from somebody, and also following tips from people on financial markets. Every second of the day is another race in a financial market, because you have to be constantly making the assessment: should I be buying some more, or should I be selling now? And unless that person's going to, speak in your ear for the length of time that you have that open position, then you're not really getting a tip, are you? You're just getting a half of a tip. So I ended up staying in it too long, and then you were talking earlier about the sick feeling and stuff like that. And somebody said to me once, there's a financial market expression, when you stop knowing and start hoping, that's the time to close your position. And I think that's true. There's definitely been things where I felt this is not going well, but I stubbornly stuck with it. And in long-term sports positions as well. I don't know. I mean,
sorry to interrupt.
Go on.
That's one of the biases. I was talking about earlier. I think optimism bias. Like, how many times you've been in a trade, it kind of not gone the way you wanted it to, and you go, well, I'm just going to hold it because they might turn it around. Whereas,
people get emotionally attached to their position.
Yeah,
that's definitely true. I don't know. I mean, I had a really bad day on the football towards the end of last season, and I probably had 50 bets that day and on football, and just lost a ridiculously large number of units, because I often have 40 or 50 bets on football on a Saturday, and generally speaking, I'm going to win or lose 2 to 10 units.
And when it gets to the last couple games, Neil, are you just almost laughing in disbelief, or with your head under the covers?
I think I didn't log on for 4 days because I didn't want to look at. I do the football on a separate account, and I didn't want to look at the balance. So I just didn't log on. And then when I did log on, the amount that I thought it would be compared with the amount it was a pretty big number different. So
better or worse?
Worse.
So you had 2 losing days.
Well, not really, because I kind of cushioned myself by pretending it wasn't as bad as it was. But I guess in my heart, I knew it was going to be worse. But yeah, that was quite weird. And then the ones I find really strange is when you have a really bad day and you lose a big number, and then you win what would normally be considered to be a really good amount the next day, and then have another loser. The second loser is really painful in that spot, because when you absolutely do your brains and then you have a good day immediately afterwards, you tend to be starting to think, oh, this is all right, I'll get all that money back really quickly at this rate. And it doesn't always work that way. I don't know.
My friend Mike Luma used to say, well, it was more about poker, that it was very hard to sleep after a big win, but after you've lost everything, you can sleep forever.
Well, that's that old joke, isn't it? How'd you get on? After losing all that money, I slept like a baby. Slept half an hour, cried half an hour. I think actually, events where I really care about them, it's worse. If I have a really bad Super Bowl, which I have done before, I think I find that a lot harder to cope with than, and partly because you got to wait quite a long time before the next NFL game. I don't really get too het up about big losses, and the way I play on the horses. It's not level stakes, but no one horse is way more important than any other horse, particularly. So there's plenty of races in a day to get the money back.
One thing on that I've found helps a little bit is just almost trying to ignore your balance. Because when you start thinking, oh, I've got to get that grand back from yesterday, you push, you try and get it back.
Right there. Yeah.
And then it hurts when you don't. And I found just kind of ignoring it, just focusing on making good bets each day.
I don't know.
Again,
although to an extent, if you've had a really good run, it's quite. I do quite like the feeling of refreshing it and watching it climb up. Quite good fun.
I suppose maybe just ignore it when you're losing. I don't know if that works.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with boosting morale occasionally in this game.
Right,
making
but
sure I
if
haven't
you
missed a horse in amongst all of this, I think I'm all right.
Obviously, I think what Brad's saying is that the higher you allow your highs to be, then the lower your lows are going to be, and I mean there is probably a lot to that as far as the qualities you need to be successful.
I think I've managed to kind of, I don't know, it's weird because people often ask me about that, and I don't really like to talk about the exact numbers because I don't know, people struggle with it enough anyway. I watched that one of the England penalty shootout. I went to the pub to watch it with a friend of mine, just the penalty shootout, and I placed a load of bets really quickly at the start of the shootout, just messing about really. I bet both teams to score the first couple of penalties, and then everybody to miss from then on in, for really quite recreational sums. And I was cheering in the pub, especially loudly when who was it they played before they got beat by Croatia? It doesn't matter anyway. When the other fella missed his penalty, I was going bananas. And he asked me, this guy, did I have a bet on? And he never really asked me that much about betting before. So I told him what I had on, which I thought was a fairly trivial amount. And he seemed quite shocked by it. And he said, well, I don't know how you can possibly sit there and watch the game without I'd be going mad. And I said, well, I was going mad. Didn't you notice I was jumping around? But that was really just England, So it's no good can really come out of talking about exact numbers.
Yeah, question for you, Neil. I was listening to some DFS pros again the other day talking about basically the highs of winning and losing so much money. They thought that it kind of numbed them to the smaller pleasures in life, as they put it. Do you ever think you've got a bit numb to other things like that because of the adrenaline of gambling, stuff like that?
I don't know.
I mean, Neil, for you, you had I think a run when you had the serious big win, the Irish Open, and a bunch of stuff all in a row.
That was a good
certainly
one. Yeah.
Must have changed your.
Well, the Irish Open was quite weird.
Because you got out of the house more often, shall we say?
Well, the Irish Open, I'd probably gone from. I'm sure I've spoken about it a million times, but I'd been kind of 400 grand in the hole a year before that, and I really slaved away that year and focused quite hard. A couple of years before actually, and I've spent 2 years really working quite hard. And before the Irish Open, I probably had 150 grand in the bank or something, and then I won the Irish Open, which was £700,000, and I wasn't really. I suddenly, for the winner's photograph or the moment that I won it, I didn't jump around or go mental or anything because actually I was just quite tired from playing the tournament. But also, it wasn't like people often say, "Oh God, it hasn't sunk in yet," or "I haven't really thought about it," or "Oh my God, it's going to take a day to sink in." It wasn't really that. I just thought, yeah, whatever. So I'm gambling every day of my life.
Now, Neil, come on.
And I just won a little bit more today than on most other days.
Now that's not true. Things did change immediately. It
definitely changed
I was
my
at
life,
the victory party, and you paid for the check.
That's true. And that would never happen now. But no, I don't think. I mean, yeah, of course, it changed my life to an extent. But not least because in poker, you there's an element of fame to winning money. When if I win a load of money on the baseball this month, which hopefully I will, please God, come on, Brad. I'm probably not going to be interviewed on television about it. We all kind of know that Tony Bloom is like, the most mega football gambler and hugely successful. But nobody really knows about his day-to-day swings. None of us have much of an idea of how he got on last month.
Neil, what you were saying reminded me of a story Mad Marty always tells. The great Mad Marty. But he was in Vegas one time. This was an unbelievable.
By the way, any podcast that ends with a Mad Marty story is all right with me.
Yeah, he was in Vegas when he was driving down, between downtown and the Strip, and they've come upon an accident, a car accident that's just happened in front of them. They've jumped out, and there's a man in the car, a tourist, his wife. They're going to get her to the hospital, and he turns to Marty. He's very shaken up, and he says to Marty, do you have any money I could borrow? I've got to pay for my wife's trip to the hospital. And Marty says to the guy, how do I know you're not going to take the money and go gamble with it? Which I thought, now Marty's been around, but I thought that was heartless.
It's quite harsh.
It is quite harsh. And the guy said to him, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. I've got gambling money. And he pulled out a huge roll of hundreds from his left pocket.
Very good. Very good.
On that note, what do you guys think? Shall we call it a wrap?
Let's wrap it up, shall we?
That's perfect. Yeah, that was good. I like that. I have heard that story before, but it's a very good one. I'd forgotten it. So.
Anyway, thanks very much. It's been great content here, guys. Incredible advice. Great stories. So thanks very much to our guest, Neil Channing from Betting Emporium.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And EGR's Brad Allen.
Cheers, Jesse.
Good luck to both you guys, and good luck to all our listeners here on the Matchbook Betting Strategy Podcast. Have a great one, guys. Thanks.